nice to see you. Glad you made it up fairly early-ish for day 2. That's me. Mobile Squared is... I've thrown myself. Right, that's us. We do a lot of insight and analyst and forecast and consultancy in the mobile messaging space. And I'm going to look at where business messaging is heading. I'm just going to start. Right, let's get on with it. Right, so the story so far. So in Barcelona, sorry, it's just going to be a little recap, really. We revealed a third of our research. So this is based on our online research and the stats that we got from it. So it's only part of the research, and it just gives you a glimpse of kind of where the industry sees things right now in terms of where we are with firewalls, the number of exclusive deals, what the impact of fraud is, biggest threat, which I always think is interesting, the laser works. Biggest threat this year, obviously AIT, and you can read the rest. So that's kind of where we were in Barcelona. And they also looked at price increases. So this shows the biggest price increases by mobile operator. This is for about the top 100 operators, or not top 100 operators, but 100 operators with the top increase in prices as a percentage of what their price was compared to 2021. So as you can see, 236 mobile operators have increased their international termination rate by more than 100%. So in actual fact, the average international termination rate in 2021 was about just over $3 cents. Right now, it's around 6 cents, just over 6.5 cents. So pretty much doubled in the space of 2 years. This gives you a view by country, and it shows that the average cost per message by markets increased in 87 markets. So again, it basically shows, as we all know, the price of everything is going up. So what we've been looking at in terms of our number crunching, and I've got to be really clear, the numbers I'm going to show you are still a work in progress. They're pretty much almost done, and there's still a few things we need to add, but it gives you an insight of kind of where we are right now as we look at the marketplace. So this was our previous view of 2022. So the market, we believed, was going to be worth about 25.7 billion, and as you can see, the split between domestic traffic and international traffic was this. So where we are right now with the view for 2022, so these would now be actuals as opposed to estimates. You can see the market's changed. It's pretty much $30 billion. And what's interesting is that actually, in terms of total spend of domestic, it's started to drop. But obviously, international has rocketed. Now that's there's been an increase in traffic. There has been AIT, which we'll come on to, but also it's primarily down to these massive price hikes that have occurred. But as you can see, there's a big change in what's happening with SMS. Again, this is something else that kind of was showed in Barcelona, and it basically showed that where we believe total traffic was in our previous view of the world, which shows that, for example, security accounted for about 30%. We now believe it's about 40%, but in actual fact, if you now look at the split in terms of international traffic, OTP is accounting for actually over $7 billion globally. So that's how big it is. So if you kind of think about where we are as an industry and what this means and the impact of something like AIT, we're gambling this kind of 7 billion, potentially gambling it away with high prices. And that's what's going to happen. So, what's happening really right now is kind of a short-term view, trying to gain massive impact on revenues, but long-term, it could be incredibly damaging. So again, this shows the average year-on-year brand increase in their spend between 2017 and 2021. So typically, on average, we'd see a leap of about 2.65 billion. So between 2021 and 2022, that leap was 5.8 billion. So that's what's changing. We're really putting more demand on brands to increase spend on something that's really already viewed as a premium. Because if you think, even if it was 3 cents several years ago, from a brand perspective, compared to if you look at kind of what they're using on the omnichannel, You're comparing that with email and in-app push notifications, which are a minuscule cost in effect, because obviously the business model's different. So that's kind of what we've got to start thinking about, is in actual fact, what is the value and what is the actual cost? And what is it worth to a brand? And, it was touched on yesterday, but can you justify 30 cents to send one message? So, this is how we typically look at the industry. White traffic, grey traffic. This is really what's happening in the industry. So this is a split between kind of what you'll see with white traffic, in terms of where AIT is, and different types of grey. I haven't obviously listed all of them. There's obviously 14. It's in the MEF fraud document. But anyway, that's kind of a typical view. So this is where we're going with it. We announced it in Barcelona. We love it. We're going Pantone. We're going to add some colour to this industry. So what does this mean? What we're really looking at now is in terms of how we divide traffic. It's going to be based on brand and consumer harm. So white traffic is the perfect traffic. Everyone's happy. That's what that is. But then when you look at other, you've now got effectively fraudulent white traffic. So you've now got different shades of white. So we're going to have light blue, which is our AIT traffic, undelivered, the ghost traffic, the traffic that's not out there, that is never really seen. Then you've got the blue traffic. The blue traffic that could be, and is potentially being delivered to consumers, where they get a one-time password which they never requested. Then on the grey side, I've said it in Barcelona, I'll say it again, not all grey's bad. So we're now looking at it. There is some grey that's used obviously as a negotiating tool to get the blended rate down, et cetera, we all know about, where there's no harm to the consumer. So I think that's a distinction that we need to make here. Then, of course, you've got orange, and within that you've got kind of SIM farm traffic, the impact that can potentially have and how the data is used, et cetera. So that's orange, that's warning, obviously, that makes sense. And then last of all, we've got the threat to the consumer. So that's red. Obviously, it makes sense. So if we look at where we are then, in terms of total messages in 2022, we've got that figure at about 2.5 trillion. And the split, you can see, is about 80% white, 20% grey. Now, if we add our Pantone view, this is what we see. So in terms of where we are with red, I'll come around here just to get the numbers. So we've got 80% red. In terms of grey, this is effectively 10%, which also basically, if you work it out, 90% then of all traffic is fraud-free on average. So then you've got this 10%. So you've got 10% here, which is AIT. In terms of the dark blue, in terms of the AIT that's delivered, it's a fraction of a percent, so you can't really see that. And then you've got your orange and your red. And these are both roughly about 3.5% each in terms of the split of total traffic. So what's the impact? So in terms of dark blue, so this is just from the consumer impact. So on dark, if you receive your one-time password that you haven't requested, and again, this is just based on average across unique mobile users, which is about 5.6 billion users globally, you will receive one every 0.04 times per year. So basically, you'll probably get one once every 20, 24 years or so, on average. Obviously, that changes per market, and you could get quite a few in some markets. In others, you never get them. In terms of orange, see, this is where it starts to get interesting. So I'll stand here so you can see it. So orange, how many orange messages we receive on average? You'll get one every 29 days. And you're going, oh, okay. But it's this one. Red messages, the danger. You're likely, on average, to get 2 of these a month. And that's worrying. That's really worrying. And this is increasing. These are both increasing. So something else that we announced in Barcelona is our SMS market monitoring service. And again, that's really going to be our quarterly service that basically tracks pricing against operators and also countries, and we then obviously take into account grey traffic, or the percentage of grey traffic, whether it's exclusive deals in place, the firewall, so on and so forth. We've given it a weighting. So from that, we can then work out which we believe whether there's a risk, which is a high risk, medium risk, or no risk at all. And right now, see, it's not really coming out particularly clear. This is actually green. You've got orange here, and then you've got red. So obviously, the majority of markets, we believe, are actually no risk. So 132 right now are no risk. There's 29 that we believe are high-risk markets. And I'm sure you're looking at those, and you're probably thinking, OK, that makes sense, because we know what the rates are, we know what the kind of traffic's like in these markets. So this is, again, it'll change slightly, but this is kind of the first glimpse into the first report that will come out in the next couple of weeks. And then, obviously, we will update that on a quarterly basis. But the thing I think I really want to kind of share, and I think this is probably most of the time, is the impact that this is now having on our forecast and our view and the data that you guys shared with us in terms of the markets, and the markets where the growth is going to peak. So 4 markets will peak in terms of growth this year. Big one, obviously, being Russia, and obviously if you charge 30 cents a message, I don't think we can all be surprised at that. But over the next 5 years, as you can see, it's spreading like a virus. So by 2027, 60% of countries would have peaked in terms of SMS. Now, if you go back 2 years, SMS was like the saviour of everything in terms of, in the post-COVID, post-lockdown world, everyone was going to SMS. Everyone loved SMS. It's the numbers that we talk about. I know James often talks about these numbers as well, but the percentage of businesses that actually use SMS, it's about 5-6%. So ideally, that's where the growth should be coming from, not enforcing price hikes on brand. Because, we should be talking about the dawn of messaging here, with SMS being the platform for that, and then beyond that, you'll obviously get the growth and the adoption of rich messaging. But what we're getting, instead of brands becoming a bit disgruntled with SMS. And SMS also is the bedrock of CPaaS as well. So in terms of what we're doing with SMS, it's going to have a knock-on effect of pretty much everything in terms of comms. So again, from our view, we've slightly updated this now. So there we are, 2022. SMS accounted for 98% of total traffic. It will account for about 91% in 2026, actually, but it's obviously going to be less than that in 2027. But why is that? It's because WhatsApp's coming. We've been talking about WhatsApp, and with their new pricing coming, and when they announce their new pricing for one-time passwords in June, I think everyone's almost of the opinion that that's it. June the 1st, all one-time passwords gone. It's all gone, and it's all going to be on WhatsApp. It's not. It's going to take a long time for this to happen. So there's no need to panic just yet. But I think the key point here is it's no need to panic just yet. So what we're seeing is potentially we should be seeing growth here. This is SMS traffic, part of our traffic forecast up to 2027. This should be going up like that, and it isn't. Why not? Because what we're now seeing is because of all the things that are happening over the last 12, 18 months or so, this traffic is now starting to migrate here onto WhatsApp. And the fact that WhatsApp changed their model from the inbound customer care to the outbound marketing promotions, and despite whatever guidelines there are and the templates that you have to use, it's pretty big now as well. You've got over 2.7 billion users. Obviously, you've got it as a brand, you've got to develop your own opt-in database for WhatsApp, but brands are doing that. And speaking with aggregators and with brands, you can get a pretty sizable opt-in database within about 4 to 6 months. So if that's what you need, if that's your kind of WhatsApp strategy, then you're probably thinking from actual commercial launch to when you can really use it to kind of communicate, you're looking at about a 6-month period. So there's still a window of opportunity, and it's a big opportunity for SMS, but it's just how quickly you kind of throw it away. I think that's the point that we probably need to make here. And there's no reason why we should do that. So here is in the cumulative spend on WhatsApp by brands between 2018 and 2022. So it's actually 0.09% over the same period of what brands spend on SMS. So then the period between 2023 and 2027, that's risen significantly. That will be about 3.5 billion. And that will be, again, 1.6% of what brands are spending on SMS. But then we jump forward. So 2028, 2030, we expect brands to spend about 16.5 billion in those 3 years. Most of that will have migrated from SMS. So it's going to take a while, but that traction has started, and it's only going to accelerate. Now, these could be actually quite conservative, depending on what happens in the SMS space over the next 12, 18 months, and how brands continue to react. That's it. That's a lot quicker. Sorry, let me go back to something. Right, I'm going to do this section slower, so we'll pretend you haven't seen it before. Right, what I've meant to talk about, so we've got consumer impact. I didn't have time to do a slide on it, on brand impact. But the brand impact, I think, is really fascinating because despite what we're saying, so if you look at AIT, and I haven't talked about AIT, have I? So we've got AIT at about just over $700 million in 2022. So we expect that to increase to over $1 billion this year. And then we think companies will start to tackle it, prices will come down, so from 2024 we'll start to see a decline in AIT. But over a kind of a 3-year period, it's costing brands about $2 billion, which is a hell of a lot, if you look at it in that perspective. But again, if you then start to think about things in terms of what does this actually mean, then if you come back to what brands spend and the impact that what's happening is having on brands, then 10% of their spend is fraud on average. But if you then apply that to another industry, so digital marketing, which is obviously I think, $600 billion industry, 40% of all activity on digital marketing is fraudulent. It's bot-driven, all clicks, the bots, etc. That's 42%. So where we are as an industry, 10%, actually we're doing quite well. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up. I think that's the other point. So I've completely contradicted myself. So maybe we need to edit this later. But it's an interesting point because you've got, okay, there's 10% of fraud. That 10% can be very, very damaging. We know that. But in the grand scheme of things, compared to other channels, SMS is still pretty clean. And I think that's the key thing here because, there's talk about SMS being a very fraudulent channel. And there is fraud on it. There's fraud on everything. That's why we're here, because it keeps us on our toes. It's cat and mouse. But that's the kind of the really interesting point, I think, is that actually we maybe shouldn't beat ourselves up as much as we are. We are actually doing quite a good job. Could do a better job because we should be selling to more brands and more businesses, and they should be using this. But ultimately, we're looking at a $30 billion industry here, which is pretty good because if you go back 5 years or so, it was what, 16, 18, so it's almost doubled in size. So you should applaud yourselves. That's it. That's me done. So thank you very much. Sorry.
So any questions for Nick?
Hey, thanks, Nick. John Murtagh here from Infobip. Just
John.
looking at WhatsApp, and I'd be interested to see how you're forecasting. But how much of WhatsApp are you putting to tech shift from SMS to grey, or SMS to WhatsApp? How much is it for conversational type use cases?
I can't tell you that yet. We've only just kind of still trying to finish SMS, and as part of that process, we're trying to obviously link it with WhatsApp. But in terms of total percentage, I've got it, but I can't remember it. So ask me after, and I'll tell you.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of the split between conversational commerce and customer care, the majority is customer care. But then obviously you've then got markets like Brazil and India, where there's a lot of promotional marketing activity there as well. So it does skew it somewhat, actually, in those two markets.
But what you're showing there is...
That's just total traffic, and that's kind of what we expect to migrate over.
But some of that is lost from SMS, you're saying?
The stuff at the end is all lost from SMS, yeah.
Ira?
Hi, interesting presentation. Just one point, I just happened to notice there was no RCS at all in this entire presentation, which is very interesting how it doesn't impact our future. But I have two questions. First of all, on your Pantone of colors, I understand that the red and the orange are basically the effects of smishing and spoofing, is that correct? Or SIM bypass, et cetera?
Yeah, negative. All the negative stuff that's potentially harmful to consumers and brands, naturally.
Okay. And the last question is about your last point about how digital marketing is 40% fraud and we're only 10%, so we should report ourselves. Probably the reason is because it's a lot more money in digital marketing, so therefore it's a lot more attractive to hackers or to fraudsters to try and get in there because there's a lot more money to be had.
Yep.
And we know that a lot of it is on the email side also, which has been rampant with fraud for 20 years. But if we look at that 10% that you said, that 10%, if it affects the OTP traffic that we're talking about, that can be lethal to the industry. Is that a correct statement to say?
Well, no, because OTP obviously accounts for probably about, I've got to work this figure out now. Well, it's roughly about 40% of traffic. So it goes way beyond what we're looking at in terms of the 3.6%, I think, which we've got at the moment for, I think, red traffic and about 3.3% for orange traffic. So, what was the question? It's quite long.
Would that only 10%, if it affects the OTP traffic, is that a lethal kick in the nuts, whatever?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, because I think a lot of the fraudulent stuff on OTP is typically AIT, which isn't delivered. So we've got, it's less than, it's a fraction of a percent that's actually delivered.
What about the lack of trust in the channel because of what's going on? Would that affect it?
But who's creating that lack of trust? We are.
Right.
And we're talking about it. So maybe we just need to kind of change our mindset and actually say, it's actually quite trustful. People click on a message because they trust the message. That's why people click on messages. That's why fraud happens. People click on emails, because for the same kind of reason. It's there. What we need to do is actually maybe just turn the story around to brands and say, this is the most effective channel compared to everything else that you're using. Okay, you may view it as a premium, but that's you're paying for the effectiveness. In actual fact, compared to all other channels, the level of fraud is actually a lot lower. So maybe, we're just going about this the wrong way, potentially.
There's another question.
Tõnis Kirsipuu from Mesente. I just had an additional question for the heat map that was the fraudulent risk, the high risk, medium risk, and low risk.
Yes.
What's taken into account when putting together that data for that risk?
So we look at, good question, it's almost like I've asked you to ask that question. So what we do, we get we get prices in from lots of providers for, it's about 6,500 operators effectively. We only take obviously the 650 that we track as part of our 200 markets. So what we do with that, for that period of time, we then take the average. So the average obviously now is about 0.645 cents per market. So what we then do is look at what's the percentage difference for each operator and the average across each market above that price, that average price at that time. And then that's basically then the starting point in terms of when then we start to look at whether it's high risk, low risk, medium risk. Because I guess one thing, again, that I didn't mention is obviously where you've got higher rates, obviously you are going to get more grey because you've got more blended action going on. So we're actually seeing more grey increasing. So in 2021, grey accounted for 16% total traffic. Last year, it's 17%. We actually think it will go back down to 16% next year. But, it shows that there's a little peak that's occurred because of what's happening in international pricing. So we use that. We then look at whether we look at the amount of grey traffic that we have for each market. And we look at, what is the percentage above the average across each market. So we apply that. We then look at whether they've got exclusive deals in place. So we know how many exclusive deals are out there. We also know the length of most of these exclusive deals, and that's quite an interesting factor as well. And then we look at whether they've got a firewall as well. So we bring all those four factors together, and then from there, that's where we then create whether it's high risk, low risk, or medium risk.
A follow-up question on that front, because just what I noticed a little bit more as it's close to my home, is Finland was in medium risk. Does that would say that there's more grey routes there there's more issues happening on the market or more changes happening on the market?
I'm going to say potentially, but off the top of my head, I don't know, because we've got too much data. Come and chat to me afterwards, and we'll have a look.
Thank you.
So Rami and then Gavin.
Two questions for you, Nick, or two parts. You talked about the increase in prices in international and domestic.
Yeah, so it's not that's the lights.
Yeah. Does that impact brands adopting, like, is it negatively impacting brands that are adopting SMS or using SMS as a channel because of that price increase? Are they going, less enterprises are using it? Is it going down or is it flat?
Well, if you look at the fact that you've got, as Carlos showed yesterday, 20 top brands are accounting for 80% of effectively the international traffic, or certainly 80% of all one-time passwords. So then if you look at 80% of the figure that we have for international, that comes in at about 6 billion. So then, if you can then play around with our numbers, and you also work out that on the AIT side, on average, those brands are spending 30 million on AIT, which then if you start to weight the traffic accordingly between the different providers, and if Twitter did 60 million, it works. We know that Facebook is significantly higher. Google is obviously on top of it, but they were aware of it, and there are lots of brands that aren't aware of AIT. So it's a tough one because brands also need SMS. It's powerful, and as we heard yesterday, it's the best way of getting a message to a consumer. The amount of times where you're, instead of one-time passwords, you're waiting for an email if you need to change your password or something, and that email, you're there, refresh. It can be days later, it appears, ta-da, and then you click on the link, and obviously it was out, kind of out of date within a few days ago. So that's kind of the experience. So brands need messaging. I just think that a lot of brands are still slow to understand what messaging can mean for them. And I think, it's the same with consumers. So on our consumer research, when we did it last time, we basically said, do you receive messages from a brand? And I think 44% across the 10 markets or so said, yeah, we receive. And then we said, have you opted in to receive messages from brands? And 91% have opted in. So it's like, well, hang on a minute. So from the consumer side of things, a lot of people don't realise that they've actually opted in for messages and what a message from a brand means. Because, from our industry perspective, something from DHL saying when your parcel's going to be delivered is A to P. But to them, because it's not, it's not from Nike, it's not the Air Force Ones that they've ordered, it's just from DHL, they'll just view that as a meaningless message. But to us, it means something. So, it is going to have an impact with the price. But right now, you've got three options as a brand. This is the kind of thing we showed in Barcelona. You either swallow the cost and pay it, and typically the average brand is paying 110 for what would have been a $30,000 campaign to send 1 million messages 2 years ago. The brand's now spending something like $110,000 to send exactly the same message 2 years on. It's crazy. So you can either do trashing and obviously only send a percentage of those messages, or you blend, and you blend it with grey. And, the point we looked at in Barcelona was that once you get to I think it's a 65% price increase, you then start to have significantly more grey than white. And obviously, the more grey you have, which comes back to your question, the greater propensity you are to then have potentially orange or red traffic within that mix. So then that's the other element that we look at when we're doing our monitoring service. So it's not a good time. I think it's going to go one or two ways. It's either going to go up or it's going to go down. But I think, bringing it back to Ari, your point, it's going to have a negative impact on something like RCS.
The other part of it is that price increase as well. Do you think it's going to increase AIT traffic to make up for some of the commitments that people...
Yeah. Yep. I mean, that's why we've got AIT spend about 700 million last year and over $1 billion this year. Because it's going to take a while for the industry to catch up and address it. Obviously, a number of companies that kind of key to this and kind of driving that charge. But, it's like grey routes. No one uses grey routes, everyone uses grey routes. The king is dead, long live the king. You know, same with AIT. Most companies are obviously benefiting from AIT because it's increased traffic over your network at some point. So, you know, it is beneficial. It's just negative on the brand. But a lot of brands, you know, that we've spoken to and our clients have told us and their brands, they're not that worried. Because, you know, it actually doesn't have that big an impact on them. There are obviously other companies that have AIT attacks, which we're also hearing from. You know, and that's throwing that mix all together. But I think the other thing to remember, AIT's always been here. We've never looked at it because it's never kind of raised above the parapet. You know, it's always just been there. You know, kind of like running a kind of a subterranean little fraudulent like, sliver of revenue. So it's always been there. But all of a sudden, some companies have gone, well, let's go for it. And yeah.
I think we have to wrap up. Sorry about that, Nick.
Okay,
We're running
sorry.
over. Apologies. But I have a quick question.
Oh,
Do you
well-
mind if we put these slides on the MEF website for MEF members?
No.
No.
Well, yes and no, because I need to update some. So let me update
Okay, if
them.
you update, perfect. 'Cause
And then I
these are
can.
very sought after slides. So I really appreciate it. Nick Lane, everyone. Thank you very much.